Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of NintendoFuse's Industry Talk. I'm your host, Barry, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Dan Tonkin from Phase 2 Games. Dan?
Hello, Barry. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's lovely to be here.
Absolutely. And your company, Phase 2 Games, is putting out a game coming out October 20th called Battle Hunters, which is a squad-based RPG. It's coming to the PC on Steam as well as the Switch. Before we get into the Battle Hunters, why don't you just introduce yourself and a little background for our viewers who may not know who you are?
So, Phase 2 Games is two people. It's myself and a guy called Toby Charlton. And we have been making video games together for, oh my goodness, 25 years, something like that. So I started work at a company called Beam Software in about 1995. And my first game I worked on was a game called Crush, Kill and Destroy on the PC, which was a RTS game. It was basically a Command and Conquer clone. It was when Command and Conquer 1 had come out, and it was really, really popular. And a lot of studios were clamoring to like do a Me Too game and get a taste of that market. So we did a game called Crush, Kill and Destroy, and it was my first job in the industry doing sprite artwork. And it was like totally been thrown in the deep end. So I had to do all of the infantry sprites, all the vehicle sprites, all the buildings, it was crazy. So I did that. It was loads of fun. I learned heaps, and then went on to do a sequel to that, a few more PC games. And then I left after about 6 years there, went to Europe to work on a PlayStation 2 game. I worked on a Crash Bandicoot game called Crash Twinsanity, which is a bit of a black sheep in the Crash Bandicoot family. It was a really difficult process, like really, really green studio. And a lot of people lacked a lot of experience, but after sort of about 3.5 really difficult years, we kind of dragged this game kicking and screaming like into the box and managed to get it out. For what it's worth, we got it there. So that was a really cool experience in terms of like, sometimes they say, difficulty is great for character building and you learn a lot from mistakes. And that was a really difficult dev process. And I learned a lot about things to avoid, better processes to adopt, how to be a bit more efficient, the importance of a really great tool chain and all that sort of stuff. So I left England in about 2003 and came back to Melbourne. And that's when things started to really get cool for me. I joined Toby, who is now my current business partner, who I'd worked with back at Beam Software on Crush, Kill and Destroy and various games. I joined him and another guy, Tony Lay, and the three of us had a very small studio doing mobile phone stuff. And this was when mobile stuff was really kind of still in its infancy. It was before it really sort of broke and there were decent games. But the thing was, we approached mobile phones like a games console. And 90% of other studios doing this stuff weren't. They were just doing really crummy, simple games like Snake and variations of that sort of stuff. And we went, let's see what we can do. So we did some really cool stuff, basically for Electronic Arts. We did a game called Samurai that Toby and Tony did, which was like a scrolling platform hack and slash. It was really cool. Then we did a version of SOCOM for EA, and then we did Fight Night. We did their first 3D Fight Night, and we did the first Need for Speed on mobile for Electronic Arts. And then we went on to do the first iPhone Need for Speed. And one of the highlights of my career was working directly on a game that was presented at a Apple press conference, and it was played on stage, and it was Need for Speed. Oh man, Need for Speed Underground, I think it was, and it was one of the first like iPhone sort of high fidelity video games, and that was awesome. And then we went on to do like, I don't know how many Need for Speeds we did for EA, like 6, I think. I don't know. Anyway,
they just turned those things out, didn't they?
Oh yeah, but it was really cool because we really got to grow our technology with the iPhone hardware and really sort of get to finally start to do things that we were always really keen to do, like better visual effects, more polygons, better shaders, all sorts of really cool stuff. But the thing that really benefited us is we all had a really strong video game design sensibility because we'd been making games for years. So we sort of brought that to the iPhone and it put us in a really good position. So we did the first Need for Speed on iPhone. We did the first Sims game on iPhone. We did Dead Space. That was probably for us, that was kind of like finally arriving. We did Dead Space for iOS on iPad and iPhone, and it was awesome. Like, I still look at it now and go, man, we really pulled a rabbit out of the hat with that. Like, it was really cool. It felt like a console game and looked better than everything else that other people were doing. Anyway, and then eventually I left that studio, and that studio is now EA Melbourne. It's also known as the Fire Monkeys because our company, Iron Monkey Studios, merged with a company called Fire Mint, and it became Fire Monkeys. So essentially, we built the studio that became EA Melbourne, which is now, like, I don't know, 140 people or something like that. So that was really great to be a part of. You know, like, I was the art director there for about 3 years, and my business partner now, Toby, he was the technical director at the EA studio, and it was really cool, you know, getting to see the thing grow from, like, basically 5 guys in a tiny little studio into like a sort of 130, 140 person studio. But it won't surprise you, with EA comes layers of management, layers of bureaucracy and complexity and company policies. I mean, one of the things that, you know, your friends used to find was hilarious is, like, nobody used to wear shoes in our studio. Everyone was barefoot all the time. When EA came in, shoes became mandatory, and that was like that was the start of it. It was like, oh, here we go. Because we never worried about dress code or anything like that. Because, you know, as games developer, you want to create a really casual, really fun environment. And so long as people are doing great work, you don't care what they look like or, you know, what their, you know, proclivities are. It's like, it's unimportant. Anyway, so about, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, I think, Toby and I both left that studio. And after about 3 or 4 months of not doing much, I said to him, do you want to start again, like you and me? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. So we started. And what we did first was we dove straight into iPhone because that was our most recent, most comfortable space, I guess.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, you know, I think we both kind of regret that because we're both console gamers at our heart. Like, we really are. We just kind of got conditioned to go smartphone. But so at the end of the day, Battle Hunters is really important to the two of us because it's a return back to the space that we love the most. You know, now we're console developers again, and it's really awesome. You know, so I don't know. I think that's a little. That's a bit about my history and my background. But yeah, I've been making games for 25 years, made every kind of genre you can imagine. Like, you know, games from Need for Speed to The Sims to platform mobiles like Kung Fu Panda, boxing games like Fight Night, you know, everything. Games like The Sims, every genre, every style, you know, I've done it. And it's been fantastic. Yeah. So now I'm trying to pour all of that, hopefully some of that knowledge is still in there, into like a really cool Nintendo Switch game.
It's so cool to hear that story about where you came from and how you came about. Because I think you're right, like that early era of mobile games, people didn't really, you know, give it a lot of thought, and a lot of those games are now lost to time. You can't actually replay them. It's gonna be one of those cool instances to see you now back on consoles, and how you transition. So let's start with this. How did this game, Battle Hunters, come to be? Like, where'd you get the idea?
Good question. Like, you know, game development is such a bizarre thing, and you know, ask most games developers will tell you that, like, the idea of having like this kind of perfect crystalline vision at the start and ending up with something at the end that closely resembles that is really rare, right? And I, you know, don't get me wrong, I really admire designers and creatives who can do that. But, you know, 99% of the time, games follow this evolutionary path where you have like a kind of an inspired goal, I suppose, where you get an idea, but it takes a lot of time to shape it, and often it will have a life of its own. It'll pull you in new directions because a game will sort of give you feedback that you don't expect, you know, and you find things that emerge. They go, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I didn't sort of, anyway. So the point being, we started out, I had this idea, tower defense games were really popular, right? And this was kind of like, it's weird, but tower defenses obviously work on the idea of the static towers with different abilities, right? They're long range or they're short range with wide area damage and all this sort of thing. And lines of enemies come at you. And I was like, well, what if it was the opposite paradigm? Like you were sort of 3 towers moving through space with different abilities, and you encounter like clusters of enemies, and you can move the tower, and they're sort of more constrained battles and something like that. How would that work? And anyway, and then we landed on this idea of, okay, let's have 3 heroes that they've each got different abilities, and you move this band of heroes through the world, and yeah, there's battles, but they're sort of locked off. And another thing was, something I did want to mention was games that really influenced me, that fed directly into Battle Hunters, were games like Zelda: A Link to the Past. I mean, who doesn't love that? Obviously, Zelda: Ocarina of Time. But then a couple of other games. Grandia 2, I really loved on PlayStation. Like,
Grandia
I
2 is
absolutely loved it. I thought it
amazing.
had the best battle system I'd ever seen. Like it
Yep.
maintained the excitement of real-time action, but also had the turn-based strategic dynamic. And I was like, this is incredible. So I loved that. Another game called Skies of Arcadia on the Dreamcast that like was, I don't know how many, I must have finished that like 8 times or something. I just loved it. And the thing about that got me was the world, the atmosphere, that they'd managed to create this space that for me had a really nice feeling, and I just liked being in that world, and floating over these chunks of landscape and those huge boss battles with your ship and these giants. It was awesome. So there's all these games that I had sort of rattling around in my head in terms of like battle systems, a sort of colorful, cartoony aesthetic for the characters, creating a world that you might not see all of it and get to explore it, but you in your mind, you sort of build the idea of this reality being bigger than what you see. So hopefully you sort of start to build a bit of a mythology. So all those ideas. One thing I really hated, always hated, was random battles. Walking along with your heroes and then do, and So I wanted to do something that was totally different. So that you have all the cool stuff of a game like Skies of Arcadia or Grandia with your heroes and your story and that sort of thing. But you get to see the battles and you get to decide, do I want to enter this or not? And maybe I need to go get some more food or potions or whatever first and stock up, and then, but just be able to have more of a consistent reality as well. Like not break it by sort of warping you into this kind of abstracted space, but have everything take place in the world. So it's more of a sort of persistent, believable space, much more like Zelda: Link to the Past sort of thing, where you're fighting in the world, So there's all these games that kind of were swirling around and had this stupid idea about a moving tower defense thing. And we just sort of started, we just started experimenting. And the game now is totally different from what it began as. It was much more originally this sort of idea of being more of a sort of sports coach, and you had these heroes that were like, your players, and you kind of build them up and you just let them go. And we just realized that was really unsatisfying. It was like, this isn't a game. This is just kind of like you set something up and then you watch it. It's more just like a simulation. It's really dull. So we just sort of started to give the player more and more direct control, to the point where, now it's like you can pretty much get the heroes to do whatever you want. You can move them to different locations, set them to defend, set them to attack. You determine when their special moves get used and who they get used on. And so we just tried to like find this balance between getting the heroes to be autonomous and do what they need to by themselves, and give the player genuine control and make it a real game with real strategy and a bit of excitement and pressure, and you've got to stay on it, otherwise you get totally smashed. And so that's kind of its inception. It's like, was this kind of dumb idea coupled with all of these latent influences of all these sort of 90s and early 2000s Jap RPGs and that sort of thing. So
You got me super excited. Just those games you mentioned are 4 of my favorite games of all time. Like, they're up there. Like, I love Grandia too. I love
Oh
Zelda,
man.
Skies of Arcadia. Oh my God,
Oh, another one you
fantastic.
mentioned. Did you ever play Wild Arms 3?
I didn't play 3. I played the first 2, but I have 3. I
Ah,
just didn't play it.
right. You see, I never played the first 2. I jumped in at number 3. Wild Arms 3, again, fantastic. Like, I love the whole kind of Western theme that they sort of went with. So all that sort of stuff. So it's great, man. You totally know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, this has me super excited with just that. And as you were describing the tower defense, because I saw that in the trailer, I got that. I could picture in your head like, oh, okay, I could see what you mean now, because the combat is really unique in this, where you pick all the turns and then the characters start moving with the enemies, so you have to plan your attacks so that they hit. And I really like that idea. So like, is there a grandiose story to go around to this, or is it just battles, or like a lot of exploration? Like,
Yeah, it's like this is the other thing. Like my business partner Toby and I are obviously we're old school gamers, and words like old school get thrown around a lot. Most people don't. They don't either know what it means, or I don't know. But um, so I say that in the sense that we believe gameplay comes first, right? You build a game first. You don't start with a kind of high level concept about story and characters. I mean, that's my view, right? Like a video game is about interactive entertainment, interactive feedback with with cool systems and dynamics that create tension and get you to make interesting choices and all that sort of stuff. Like that's what games are about. So we just our story is kind of like it ranks right up there with games like Ghouls and Ghosts. The princess has been captured, rescue her. It's kind of about that complex, but basically, I mean, there's a little more to it than that, which I won't give away. But essentially, there's this old wizard in the world you inhabit, in the kingdom, and he appears to one of the heroes at the start and says, "I need your help." And there's this villain that I'm trying to keep controlled because he poses a real threat to the world. And I need you guys to come and get to me as quickly as possible because I don't know if I can hold him for long, and I need help, right, in order to put an end to this guy. So that's how the game is set up. Is like you're on your way to help this guy who the game implies he's like an old ally of yours. You know, your heroes have sort of known him for a while, and he's been a sort of benevolent member of the kingdom, and he's and so yeah, so that's the setup. So you're on your way to help this guy, and you've got to make your way through the kingdom in order to get to him. And you have to discover these warp points. So these big old sort of ancient machines that can warp you big distances across the kingdom in order to get to him. So that's kind of the cut and thrust of it. It's really just a classic style, call to action for heroes. And on the way, you meet loads of other heroes who have their own kind of backgrounds as well, and they're in the world for different reasons. And they're either ready to join you straight away because they're sort of noble fighters who just want to do something good, or they want something from you, or you need to prove something to them. So different heroes require different sort of sub quests, I guess, to be convinced to join you or to be unlocked or whatever. Some are quite sort of complicated, and some of the more like really special, super powerful heroes, you've got to do quite a bit of legwork to unlock them. We want the player to work for it a bit. You can't give them all the good stuff for free. So there's characters like really early on in the game, you encounter this. We call him the Mecha Marine. So he's basically a soldier in a robotic suit of armor that's clearly from like a sort of sci-fi reality. And he sort of crashed and his suit won't work. And he's like, "Can you guys help me? Like my suit's malfunctioning. I can't get out of it." And you're like, "Okay, cool. Like we'll do what we can." And he explains what he needs. And then you set off, and like most players will probably forget about him or not get around to it. But if you do the right things, you can come back and you can rescue him, and he joins your team. And he's like crazy because he's like got like missiles and a laser rifle and a defense shield and all sorts of cool stuff. So we sort of plant these little nice nuggets along the way for the player to sort of be lured back to go, "Oh, okay, I'm going to go back and get that guy because he might be cool." And we do that all throughout the game.
That sounds amazing. That's one of those things I noticed too when looking at the trailer. Is it's a very medieval style game, and then you do have the mechs, and you have like there's a tank. Like what was the inspiration for putting some of these more complex sci-fi or realistic elements into a fantasy world?
Well, for me too. Like I wanted to. I mean, this is an ongoing thing for me, but I kind of wanted to do a bit of a love letter to video games as a medium, because I think video games are fantastic in the breadth of what they explore and the sort of fun they create, and all of these wonderful sort of archetypes that have been, that sort of exist in the video game landscape. These wonderful archetypes, and I kind of wanted to embrace a lot of those. So there's lots of that in our game. There's this kind of mech soldier. There's kind of like World War II military hardware. There's a cowboy in it that you meet. There's like a ninja. I kind of went like, look, what are the cool things? Like, what are cool types of characters? You know, can we find an excuse to get them all into this game? And so we create a kind of justification for it that we don't really explain, but you know, in my mind, there's a reason why this is possible. So there's a sort of narrative device that explains why these characters that seemingly don't really belong all end up in this world. And yeah, we don't really explain what that is, but there is kind of an underlying reason for it. So I kind of just wanted to sort of do an homage to like all of these wonderful kind of archetypes that exist in video games, and sort of pluck loads of different ones out and just say, yeah, let's just stick them in our game. Like, why not? If I can come up with a sort of tenuous way to explain it, then it's more important the player has fun than things make sense. That's kind of my philosophy, I think.
You know what? I like it. I think that's perfectly good reason. Now you've done so much with the mobile aspect.
Yeah.
What was it like bringing this to Switch, coming back to consoles? Like, was it like riding a bike, or was it, you know, a little more difficult than you remember?
Nah, look, my business partner might disagree. No, he wouldn't actually. I think he's really enjoyed it. It was great, you know, like looking at how we could add some more sort of visual fidelity to the game. Like, we've done a lot of things on the Switch visually that, you know, we didn't do on mobile, and you know, like there's shading for a start. Like, the characters all have shadows and have self shading and all this sort of stuff, and we do this cool like rim light thing on them. And we're actually doing, like, I think it's about 3 full screen passes where we do some like dynamic color correction and all this sort of stuff. But so there's some technical stuff going on that was really cool for us to do. Like, for me, because I'm the art guy, like I love that stuff. Like, it lets me get closer and closer to representing these characters in the way I really want them to be seen. You know, so the Switch has given us the ability to do that. But you know, look, technically, you know, we also come from a background where back in the mobile days, we would do a game on, oh man, 30 different SKUs. So we are really comfortable and very used to looking at a new platform, looking at it technically, understanding what it can do and what its limits are. So we still find going to a single platform is not a big deal. It's like, oh yeah, you know, you figure out how it works, what its limits are, and you work with it. So it was really a lot of fun, I think, for us. Really a lot of
That's
fun.
awesome.
And you know, we did find some surprising things about the Switch technically that I didn't anticipate. For example, like the way, now I'm going to get this wrong. I'm pretty sure it's the GPU, I think, that's throttled back when it's in portable mode, and it's quite a lot. Like, it runs at about half the speed than it does when it's docked. So, you know, you're playing the game docked when you're testing it, and it's running at 60 frames, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic. And then you pull it out and start playing it in handheld mode. And suddenly you start to see the frame rate drop in areas, and you're like, oh, what's that about? And then you've got to find out about how you can control, you know, the throttling of the GPU and stuff like that. So, you know, that there were a few hurdles to get over, but I think in the end, I'm really happy with what we've got. We've got a game that runs at 60 frames, I want to say 85, 90% of the time. So that's really great, I think. Like, you know, there's areas where there's a lot of transparency, more visual effects going on that kind of like you see a bit of a frame slow down, but we've tried to make sure that never impedes the gameplay. You know, like at no point, I mean, I've played this thing through like, I don't know, 50 times or whatever. Like, I don't think at any point it undermines the gameplay experience.
Well, that's good to hear. So now that Battle Hunters is done, what's next for Phase 2 games? You have another project you're ready to do? Are you doing DLC? Are are you doing it, what is it going to be?
Well, we've got like, we've probably got about 5 different ideas, you know, that we could do. And, you know, one of the mountains I desperately want to climb in my career before it's all done, I want to do the greatest scrolling beat 'em up that's ever been made, right? So that's in my head. My business partner's not as much of a combat fan as I am, but I wouldn't mind looking into that. If Battle Hunters turns out to do okay, and you know, it's sort of well received by the community, like, we definitely would consider doing a Battle Hunters sequel. And I've already got a kind of design in my head. The idea for that would be we take the characters into actually like a dedicated sci-fi universe. So the game transitions from kind of classic high fantasy into sci-fi, and we actually do the sort of thing like kind of there'd be shades of Mass Effect in it actually, where we'd have like a hub ship, and instead of different zones like the forest and the swamp and the wasteland, there'd be different planets that you explore. And so, but utilizing the same battle system with some added complexity, like we've talked about, introducing a cover system and having more complex enemy interactions, like enemies with their own drones and all sorts of stuff. So there's that. My business partner absolutely loves Banjo-Kazooie. It's always been one of his absolute pinnacles of games he loves. And I think he makes an excellent point. He said that there isn't really a game quite like that at the moment, that sort of genre. I mean, aside from Nintendo, who still seem to like produce games of that sort, like sort of classic 3D platform adventures, it's a sort of genre that is overlooked by a lot of, and he'd love to do something like that. So I don't know, like there's all sorts of things we might do. The first thing is to see how Battle Hunters goes, definitely, because we've poured so much time into this game. Like, it's 2 guys, it's taken 6 years, 7 years, I don't know.
Wow.
I lost track of it. Taking a long time, and it's crazy. So like, I've done everything. Every single pixel you look at is done by me, and every single bit of code, including the engine, the tools, all of the sort of game logic, everything is done by my business partner. Like, it's kind of weird in an era where everybody uses Unity or Unreal, because we're kind of dinosaurs. We just went, nah, we'll just write our own engine. We don't need that stuff. So that's why it's taken so long. But we've invested so much time and effort into this game. We really got to see how it goes. And if it does well, I think we'd probably happily do a bigger, better sequel, more ambitious. And we'd probably go, you know what, let's not limit it to Switch. Let's also go PlayStation, Xbox, all that sort of thing. So now that we're back at console and we're absolutely loving it, we're just going to go hard on that space, I think. Our next game is going to be everywhere. So, but for right now, we've ended up with a game that we think is absolutely perfect for Switch, in terms of the sensibility of it. Like, you've seen it's kind of got a kind of light aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of games are way too serious these days. They're too earnest and they take themselves too seriously. And I kind of miss the days when games were bright and colorful, and even the bad guys were kind of fun, It wasn't about being gruesome and angry. So I think our game is right at home on Switch for a lot of those reasons. I think it sort of suits Nintendo as a brand. Yeah.
I agree completely. Now, I always ask this to every developer I talk with. What about a physical? You think you pursue the path of getting a physical copy of
Yeah, I
Battle
think we would if now. Yeah, I'm going to say it again. There's only 2 of us, so resources are not like exactly abundant. So we'll have to see if the digital release goes well. We would absolutely look at doing a physical copy for sure. I mean, for my own gratification, to have that in my hands would be like a hugely emotional moment. I can't tell you. To have done a game that we created on a Nintendo platform, for me would be, I mean, that's like arriving, that's like you've made it. So I would love to do that if it's possible, because it would mean so much to the 2 of us actually to do that. So yeah, we got to see how the digital, I mean, so if people want to, want that to happen, get out there and get the digital copy and get into it. But yeah, so absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So one last thing. I also ask this of everybody just because the answers are really cool. If any developer out there came to you, or any publisher, and said, hey, we want you to create the next game in the blank series, what would be your dream game right now? Anyone come, we want you to make the next whatever game you want.
Look, I've got a curveball for you. I'm going to say straight off the bat, I'm going to say Golden Axe, because I think that, I'm another one of my favorite games, absolutely all-time favorite, is Streets of Rage 2. I still think it's arguably the best scrolling beat 'em up that's ever been made. And as a kid, going to the arcades and seeing Golden Axe, that blew my mind. The original Golden Axe. And what I find really weird about what publishers do with properties is a lot of the time they're really good at misunderstanding them. Like, so Golden Axe is this dwarf in like a green tunic with an axe, right? And like, I want to see that done in the modern era with modern technology. Admittedly, I'd try and preserve a kind of cartoony sensibility, but do it with the appropriate detail and style and visual effects and treatment and all that. So that's one that sort of I've often thought about, because I think the Golden Axe franchise is so underserved. Like they've done some horrible things with it. That
You mean you didn't like Beast Rider? Come on.
I mean, it's precisely what I'm talking about, right? Like this wonderful, colorful game with vibrant and they give us this brown game that doesn't even have Gilius Thunderhead in it. Like, I mean, actually, I think he's got a cameo in it. But anyway, so that's something that stands out. But I mean, look, man, I could talk to you for hours about if only someone gave me this IP, what would I do with it? I mean, there's loads. I'm going to go against the grain. I'm kind of disappointed with what Sega did with Streets of Rage 4. I bought it, played it. I was like, it's okay. It's like a kind of repaint of Streets of Rage 2, really. But that's another one. I'm like, man, let me at that. I'd love to do that. I don't know. There you go. Too many to count.
Hey, those are some great options, and I would love to see a Golden Axe return to form. So, yes, Sega, start making some phone calls. All right. So, Dan, I just want to thank you for joining today. If you want more information on Phase 2 games, please go to phase2games.com. You can check them out on Twitter at Phase 2 Games. And of course, Battle Hunters is coming out October 20th. It is coming out on PC via Steam. So check out the Steam page as well as the Nintendo Switch. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you very much, Barry. Again, I really appreciate the invitation, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
The pleasure is all mine. And now for everybody else, thank you for watching and listening. And remember all your Nintendo news, please go to NintendoFuse.com and check out our YouTube for videos like this, other industry talks, our podcast, game chats, and a bunch of other content. Have a great day, everybody. Take care and see you next time.